Hello, everybody. Good Wednesday evening here for those in the US. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. And today's topic is what it would have been like if you had grown up with thought autonomy. I thought that was a pretty apropos topic for some of the things we've been talking about for a while. So we'll get started in just a couple minutes. Hope y'all have had a good week so far. My week has been good but busy. Lots of interesting things going on in terms of litigation, of course, always a downer. Hey, Jen, thank you so much for joining us. And just lots and lots of things going on. But I definitely wanted to get back on the horse or whatever the expression is as soon as I could. So here I am, and definitely going to be trying my best to get back into the swing of things in terms of just doing a lot of these topical things, as well as getting back to the interviews that I've been doing. I've got a lot of interviews actually that I've done. I simply haven't been able to get a lot of them edited, but I'm looking forward very much to doing that ASAP. There's a lot of good ones coming that I've already done again that are going to be pretty cool. Hey, Anne-Marie, thanks so much for joining us. And hey, Brennan, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And so again, thank you all, those of you who, thanks, Brennan. Brennan says, love your channel. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. For those of you that are kind of more closely following me and my story, and hey, Stephen, great to see you. For those of you who've been following me and my story, I'm sort of in the thick of it with a lot of the different aspects of what's going on in my life. There's going to be times when I do, unfortunately, have to step away from things and kind of take care of the needs of the day in terms of the, again, the litigation and court stuff. But try my best to stay focused as much as I can on getting back to the channel every which minute that I can, every which way I can, every minute I can. And it's always in my mind. I'm kind of, even when I'm not like physically doing an actual interview or publishing one or doing a live stream, these thoughts are always in my mind. And I'm constantly always working on notes. Believe me, my note taking is almost like nonstop, but it all adds up. It comes back to a point where hopefully some of those thoughts maybe even are better because they've had more time to kind of simmer. So anyway, let's get started. Wanted to say this discussion, I'm sure you can see from the topic, again, what it would have been like if you'd grown up with thought autonomy. It could be a possibility that somebody could take that as a way of saying, this is just a way of saying, I would like to imagine what life would have been like for those of us who if we could have had that, but it's just like, it's like a backhanded way of saying the past generations did a really bad job. So let's blame them and let's put them in the spotlight for the horrific things that they've done. That's not my goal at all. And I hope that comes across. I really do. It's not what this is about. It's yes, there's going to be times when it's going to sound like that, but this is just about reimagining what life would have been like had that autonomy been intact. And I hope it will give us some inspiration to think about what we can do to give that gift to the next generation. So that's what it's all about. And of course, for me, it's very, very, very real in that I've got 4 kids, age 9 and under. And so my goal is very much to be living these things out that we're going to talk about. Just a few quick comments. Accidentally agnostic, great to see you. And Greta Newman says hello. And Greta says, first time subscriber, love to chat. Thank you, Greta. Please feel free to reach out to me on Facebook. My handle there is at Harmonic Tim. So I would love to chat with you as well. So we're getting started here. Again, I want to imagine with you a world where thought autonomy was respected from your childhood. What would that journey be like, with the freedom and the empowerment? And so I'm just going to start with that question. Do you ever wonder about that? Do you wonder what your life could have looked like if your thought autonomy had been respected and intact from the very earliest days of your life? What would that have meant? What would your life have looked like? How would it have been different? In many ways, a lot of us would kind of cringe at the reality of like, wow, that would have been so nice. I can't even imagine, wrap my mind around how different life could have been. And this is, of course, not meant to look back in a depressive sense and say, man, that really stinks. But to say, yes, it happened. We're not here to just claim the victim card, but we're here to say that we're going to look at this with an imagination, so some sort of sense of saying, let's try to, yes, reimagine it, but also let's imagine what we can do for the next generation. So I think a lot about what it would have looked like to think freely, to explore these different ideas about life and philosophy without any limits, without fear, without intimidation or threats of hell. And, as former Christians, I think many of us look back and realize that our minds were, in fact, in a sense, caged from the very start. We were coerced into a sense of belief. It's like we're a Christian family. This is what we do. You were pressured into conformity, and you were conditioned, like I was probably, to believe that to believe that any deviation from the accepted doctrines of the church and the family was basically a place where you should be afraid. You should be afraid of what you were doing, of how Satan's how Satan's got you to this point, and is going to do even worse if you don't stop. What if it happened different, though? What if instead of being told what to believe, we were invited to go on a journey of exploration, of growth and self-discovery? It's a beautiful thought to me, a beautiful thought. So I'm going to go through a couple of quick thoughts here. Number one, I wanted to mention that I think a big one for me is just curiosity. I love those books, of course, as we all did as kids, Curious George and the cartoons, but curiosity was such a wonderful word. I think our childhood curiosity would have been kept alive and well and not extinguished if we had been free to have our thought autonomy intact. I like to imagine, that sense of wonder as a child, almost like it's unbridled, where you have all this endless questions about the universe and the stars and insects and the ocean and the vast universe. My little boy, Ethan, he's 6, but he just, you take him to a pond or the forest, park, whatever, and he just lights up. He's like, what can I find? What frogs can I find? What lizards? What insects? Look at Daddy. Look at this leaf. How pretty it is. Curiosity and wonder about the world is so beautiful. And imagine if your curiosity about bigger questions beyond just the color of the leaves or the weather or something, mundane. What if the questions about the deep things of life had been met with huge enthusiasm? And instead of being told God did that as the end of all the questions, what if we were encouraged to delve deeper, to sort of explore the whys and the hows without being shut down by very, very simplistic answers? And for a lot of us, it really was. It was shut. Check your brain at the door. Just shut it down. Just praise God, from whom all blessings flow. It's like a flame. That flame of curiosity would have been kept alive for so many of us. And in some ways, we all still keep it alive, but it's so restricted. We've got this rigid set of beliefs that are all around us and saying, you have to think of it this way. I think a lot of us were afraid of being labeled as rebellious or difficult in terms of this curiosity question. So if you were questioning the story of Noah's Ark or Jonah and the whale and saying, that doesn't sound right. Jonah was inside the whale's belly for 3 days and didn't die, and this and that, and Noah's Ark, what about this with the animals? And so many questions. Imagine if your parents and your teachers had said to you, that's a really good question. Let's explore it together. Let's think about it. And instead of turning away from the uncomfortable questions, what if the adults around us had engaged with us and said, let's create an environment where this discovery and exploration is something that we can do together. And it is a value. We love your questions. We welcome them. And sort of a second point, I think your world and mine in that context would have been full of open dialogue. The curiosity would have naturally created lots of open dialogue. It would have been about, as it were, conversations and not about your conversion. It wouldn't have had this hidden agenda. It felt like to a lot of us, I think, as Christians, that we had so many hidden agendas that we were, as we deconverted, we realized like, oh, that's what was going on this whole time. But those hidden agendas from our parents and our churches to basically say, we need to keep you on the straight and narrow. And also, as you get, to a certain age, you need to think of yourself as in the battle. We're raising little soldiers for Jesus. When I was growing up, family dinner was a big deal. Eating together. Of course, back then there weren't like tablets, and a TV was, monstrosity. So you couldn't like sit next to the TV easily. So family dinner was family dinner. You talked. And I like to think about where like if you were sitting around at family dinner time and you're talking about maybe different religions or different beliefs where they're openly discussed, and instead of basically we were always thinking about everybody else in terms of things like, are they saved? Or if they're Christians, do they have the right doctrine and teaching? And there was just this strong sense of disappointment toward anybody who would ask certain questions, like, why are you doubting? Imagine that instead you heard words like, what do you think? How do you feel about that? What are your impressions? You know, conversations would be about real exchanges of ideas, not these thinly veiled attempts to convert people or persuade them to think like us. I think a lot about the teenagers who are really starting to put pieces together, and you know, you get past the Santa Claus isn't real phase and all that, but eventually some teenagers do get to that phase. You know, all praise to them for getting to it early, because I didn't get there. I was neck deep in it. But imagine teenagers who are saying, I'm not sure if I really believe in God or the Bible. And what if that was met with understanding and compassion and even acceptance instead of fear? Parents saying, you know, that's okay. Let's explore. What do you believe? Let's understand why you feel this way. What did you learn? What are you thinking about? Imagine the beauty of that. The way that would foster trust and strengthen relationships and create family dynamics that are built on love and respect, not control or fear. I think a natural outcome of that, for a third point, will be education would have been in many ways about truly exploring. Imagine what it would have been like in your childhood school, probably a Christian school if you're on this channel, but a Christian school or maybe a homeschool where they encouraged divergent thoughts, and it was not about indoctrination. For many of you, especially those of you who were homeschooled, you know it was about indoctrination through and through. Imagine you're walking into a classroom where the Bible is presented not as the only truth, but as simply one text among many in this grand tapestry of human thought and philosophy. And our education is about diverse perspectives. It's a rich set of ideas that we can glean this from and that from, take the best from this and the best from that, and leave the bad behind. But instead, it's like, no, this book, everything in it is good and it's from God. Imagine if you were in a school, you could actually read different texts from various religions. I know for me, we didn't read anything. We didn't read the Quran. We didn't read Buddhist texts. We didn't read, all kinds of stuff. You'd occasionally read something from a Catholic, but even that was a stretch. It was seen as like, it's all just variations of a theme, and the theme being Satan is deceiving all these different groups. But what if you could learn about other religions and learn about secular philosophies, and for sure to understand the scientific method, which that was not a big deal for me growing up, without that ever-present message that this is part of the demonic lies. This is part of Satan's plan to make you doubt. I know that there was a lot of poisoning the well when I was growing up about college, about going to a secular college. Like if they talk about science and they're not going to immediately say God did it, that you're basically you're paying for a satanic teacher to teach you. Like, why would you do that to yourself? Go to a Christian school. I think too about learning history. What if you could imagine a school where they talk about things like the Crusades, the Inquisition, and the various missionary movements and pastors. And instead of being taught, these are just these wonderful triumphs of faith, but instead that they are very complex human events. And yeah, there's occasional interesting stories or even occasional heroism in those stories, but there's also overwhelming tribalism and racism and violence, atrocities and crimes against humanity. What if you could learn that? To me, when I learned about the Crusades, it was all praise to God for rescuing the Holy Land from these horrible invaders who wanted to worship Allah. Things like that. What if you got the freedom to actually investigate and think through it carefully? I think about how that would change your politics as an adult a lot. If you're thinking about ancient history that way, you're also going to think about current events through that grid. I imagine, too, the idea of being able to debate, whether it's in an actual debate club or thinking about, just with your family. Talk about the different motivations behind why did certain things happen in history. Overall, whether we're talking about history or just indoctrination, imagine being able to draw your conclusions about any topic without any fear of divine retribution. What if you could think, it doesn't matter what the topic is, I can land a different place than you, and God's not going to get me for that. I think in that context, evolution could be a very thrilling adventure, instead of a rigid path toward a certain predetermined conclusion. I think a lot of us would have been growing up, if we had thought autonomy intact, we would have been growing up free from fear. Can you imagine growing up liberated from the tyranny of hell? I mean, I know a lot of you have said that you feared because you grew up in a context where theologically they said you could lose your salvation. So hell was not just real in the first place, it was real on a recurring basis. Like, I could literally have been, sort of on the way to hell and then escaped it, and then now I'm back on that path. But, if your thought autonomy had been respected, you would have been free from that terror, the terror of eternal damnation, which is a fear that many of us have instilled from the earliest days. It's in our youngest memories. We just know that we know that we know that God sends the people who believe to heaven, and he sends the people who don't believe to hell. What if you could grow up and investigate and think and explore without that constant gnawing fear that if you question too much, or if you go down the wrong path, if you doubt too much, if you stray too far, it will lead to unimaginable suffering in the afterlife? I like to imagine a child hearing something like this. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to doubt. It's okay to explore. It's okay to change your mind. And imagine a world like that for children, where their fear is instead replaced with curiosity, and where they're allowed to search for the truth, and that's valued more than your adherence to specific teachings. That freedom from fear, I think, would allow all of us to approach life with open hearts and open minds. And it would also take care of a lot of anxiety and dread. So many of us just knew that we couldn't go down certain paths. We just couldn't. Excuse me. I think in a similar vein, next thought of this was, I think a lot of us would have grown up without guilt and shame for just being human. I think a lot of you can relate to that, right? I mean, can you imagine all the energy that you spent feeling guilty for thoughts and feelings that were just natural and human? A lot of this is going to crisscross over into topics of sexuality, but I think this one's a little bit more obvious. And it has so many implications. Again, I'm not talking about sexuality for the most part in this conversation, but just talking about how the guilt and shame for just being human was such a big deal. And I reflect on my own children, and I consider, honestly, too, that just the mental health ramifications of growing up with or without thought autonomy. Imagine a life where, instead of being told that you're inherently sinful and that your bodies and desires are shameful, that you're taught to embrace your humanity. I think about a teenager maybe who's starting to go into puberty and maybe even wrestling with their sexuality on some level. And instead of being told, that's so bad, that's so wicked, that's so awful, God hates that, or you're an abomination, to be told you're beautiful just the way you are, and that love in all of its forms is worth celebrating. Kids aren't taught that in Christian schools. They're taught that the people that are different, the people that don't do it God's way, the people that don't do it God's way are under his judgment. And in some ways, he already kind of hates them, and he will get them back for distorting his plan and his picture. For a lot of us, it was literally like God designed men and women because he wants to picture Christ in the church. All kinds of spiritualized interpretations of that kind of stuff. But there was no way in that context to celebrate the diversity of human love and expression, and for people to truly, like all the people, to feel beautiful just the way they are. So I like to imagine the freedom that we could have had to explore our identities without that huge weight of the religious condemnation. That guilt completely suffocates your ability to have joy. I know they preach joy, that God gives you joy, God gives you so much love and happiness and peace that passes all understanding. But when you're told you are inherently wicked and you are never enough there is shame that you can't shake it. You can't shake it. I think a lot of us would have also said that if we had grown up with thought autonomy, we would have perhaps experienced love without, like family love, without conditions or expectations. I mean, in a world where your autonomy gets respected, relationships are going to, of course, be fundamentally different. And in a word, I think they would be genuine. I like to think about friendships too, and for sure, again, family bonds where the love that someone has for you is not contingent on your beliefs. I grew up in a family where we talked a lot about we are not just like we in terms of our immediate nuclear family, but we as an extended family. Your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, we are a Christian family. When we get together for Thanksgiving or whatever we're getting together for, we pray together as a family before the meal, and we talk about godly things, and we build each other up in our faith. 20, 30, 40 people, extended family, and deviation from that was not acceptable. It just wasn't. I imagine what it would be like to know that you are valued just for who you are and not for how much you memorized verses or how well you did at sword drills. Do some of you remember those sword drills? For those of you that don't know, that's where this somebody like a teacher starts reading from a scripture, and they have their Bible usually hidden a little bit so you can't quite see where in the text they are, but you have to be able, they'll just start reading and you have to find out exactly where their verse is. And of course, someone like me who memorized thousands and thousands of verses, I could usually do that in a heartbeat. I mean, I almost at times didn't even need to open up my Bible to confirm my suspicions. I'm like, I just know without opening my Bible, I know exactly where you're reading from. The book, the chapter, and even the verse number. Imagine that wasn't part of your psyche as to how valuable you are. You don't get any value from how good you are at sword drills, for goodness sake. It's just crazy. I think about children who would hear something like this. I really love you, but I worry for your soul. And instead, if they could have heard, I love you no matter what you believe. I love you no matter what you believe or don't believe. Relationships being built on trust, mutual respect, without manipulation and fear, it's such a beautiful thing. And I think we would learn to love others for their unique selves and not as projects to convert them, to save them, to get them to be more like us or to be more on fire for God. I know a lot of people don't like to use the word spirituality, and I honestly don't use it much. But I think if we were to use that word, again, I kind of want to redeem it, to borrow a Christian word. I'd want to redeem it and redefine it a little bit, but I'm not going to take too much time to do that here. But in a sense where you might say, I do have a sense of life that feels spiritual, whether you want to say that's just the chemicals in your brain, or you want to say, I feel like there's some cosmic connection or something bigger, whatever spirituality could have and did mean to you or does mean to you, to think of it as a journey and not a destination, where you're talking about, I'm seeking the right path for me, and the goal, there's no end goal in sight. I know for some people that's like, well, that's just plain weird. Why would you seek something with no end in sight? But when you realize what is happening in religion, and you realize that they're, dead men from 2,000 years ago are predetermining the end goal of your spirituality, you really don't have any chance to make up your own choices. And in that sense, the destination is predetermined. What if instead spirituality is a personal quest, and it's not like a race to the finish line or about salvation? What if different spiritual practices were open to you, like meditation or yoga, or just walks in nature, reading philosophers, without any pressure to arrive at a specific conclusion? I remember for me, we were taught that yoga was connected to Eastern religions, and therefore it was demonic. And I'm sure a lot of you heard the same thing. Something as simple as yoga, put on a little quiet music, do some slow stretches, slow exercises. That's of the devil. The craziness of that. But the sense of, for a lot of people, if you didn't ever hear the words, that's an Eastern religion thing and that's therefore demonic, it's just a way to calm your body and to get a little exercise. It's very meditative, and it frees you from stress. What if that was part of your spirituality? I think a lot these days of how we're connected to the planet and to nature, and how much we miss when we don't reflect on that connection and delight in it. And all this time, we could have been free to look up at the stars or enjoy the quiet of the forest or even the rhythm of a drum, horror of horrors, to look through the pages of different books of ancient texts, the Bible, other books too, and to glean from all these different sources, not because we're told to or to restrict ourselves to just one, but because it simply resonates with your unique experience and desires. What if you could say to yourself, I'm in a conservative, strict, evangelical, fundamentalist Christian family, and I kind of want to stay a Christian, but I want like a much milder version. I have gay friends and I want to love them. I don't want to talk about hell. I don't think it's real. I don't think it's fair. And I want to take some of the good parts of Jesus, but leave the bad behind. He called a woman a dog. He did all kinds of things that were horrific to people. He talked a lot about hell. I want to leave some of that behind. Can I take the good parts of Jesus and leave the bad? Well, if that's your spirituality that you really want to do, that's your journey. There's no prescription. There's no rules to this. You can do what you want. But what if your spirituality was about your journey, not a destination? I think a lot of us in that context would have learned to thrive in complexity. We were taught that cognitive dissonance is something to ignore. You just have to believe. Again, check your brain at the door. But what if we've been taught that cognitive dissonance is a natural part of life, and instead of something to be avoided at all costs or to just find simplistic answers, what if that tension between faith and doubt isn't a spiritual crisis, but it's a sign of growth and maturity, where you're encouraged to sit down with your questions and explore those doubts and to recognize that life does have ambiguity and complexity and gray area, and that's okay. Imagine as a child if you've been told, it's okay to feel conflicted. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to embrace the mystery. That's where your growth happens. It's where you become more and more thoughtful and mindful and beautiful. I mean, that would have created in us a sense of resilience and open-mindedness and a willingness to engage with different things in the world around us. I think those are beautiful, beautiful things to aim for. I'm going to pause for a second and look at some of the comments because I'm realizing that I have a lot more thoughts I wanted to go through than I think I'm going to get through tonight. And I don't want to save the comments to the very end at this point because there's a lot of good stuff I'm sure that's coming in. So I'm going to take a second and step away from my thoughts on this, if that's okay with everybody. So again, hey, Derek, great to see you. Greta says, a lot different. That's a lot of what I've been thinking. Yeah, it certainly would. Jesus Reyes Lopez, greetings from Salapa, Veracruz, Mexico. Thank you so much for joining us. Steve says, very true. If not for the training, life would have been so much easier and less stressful. Yeah, agreed. Definitely wish innocence lost didn't happen. Yeah, that's a really good point, Greta. For a lot of us, we really did lose that innocence. It's interesting how they tried to protect our innocence, but in many ways, they really destroyed it. That actually would be, I'm glad you said that. That would be a really good idea for a different live stream. I think I'm going to put some thought into that. And maybe in a few weeks, I'll bring that topic back to the forefront. That's a really good point. Tim, this is why I say that your channel is our thoughts and voices. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that. I definitely want to be helping people think through this. And I love how it's kind of like a sounding board where I get a lot of great ideas back. Greta says, living life in the box. Yeah, great way to put it. I feel teaching children about hell and the devil is child abuse. Yeah, absolutely. Very, very much so. Stephen, fear, guilt, and shame. And Crystal says, hi, Tim. Hey, Crystal. Thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you here. Stephen says, opinions are not allowed to unless it's the church opinions. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can have your opinion as long as it agrees with what they already said. Greta says, my son goes to a charter school with all the different religions. That's awesome. Very cool. And his exposure has made him a great kid. I hope more kids turn out that way in this generation. Yeah, absolutely. Anne-Marie says, why would the Christian God punish you infinitely for a finite crime? Doesn't sound just to me. Yeah, agreed, 100%. Anne-Marie, dittoing the earlier comment, my daughter attended a charter school too. She's now a happy, healthy free thinker. Yeah, that is awesome. My kids are now in 3 of the 4 are in a public school. and it's amazing. They're, I see them, running out with their friends and see them in pictures sometimes. They have friends that are, I'm sure, of different faiths and different ideas, and it does my heart so much good. So much good to see that. That diversity from an early age is awesome. Tenacious Art Girl, I was struggling with which Jesus was true, the Calvinist Jesus of my current church or the Arminian Jesus excuse me, from my previous church. Then I found out neither is true. Yeah. And you could certainly, for sake of argument, expand that out to so many other Jesuses, the Jesus of Mormonism, the Jesus of the JWs, the Jesus of all kinds of different subgroups all over. I had a lot of exposure to sort of conservative fundamentalist Baptist groups. And for them, it didn't matter what other, if you weren't Baptist, basically, if you weren't Baptist, you weren't saved, Let's see here. Four is within. Tim is back in the saddle. Stay strong. Thank you so much. Definitely trying to get back on board here and be producing a lot of great content. And again, I've got so much I want to share. I love the way that live streams have been evolving for this, and I've got some thoughts for how to do it better. I'm probably going to eventually have a few notes up, so it's easier to kind of follow where I am. But we'll see. Some of that's just a time factor, but I appreciate everybody, your support. Fire Unbeliever, so great to see you. I was thinking about how many scientific and technological advances we'd have if we were allowed to honor our curiosity. Yeah, great point. And I forget who it was. It said something like we would have been, was it Hitchens? Somebody said we would have been, 1,000 years more advanced in terms of our technology if Christianity hadn't taken over the world when it did. It's just crazy to think about. What if SpaceX had existed by 1000 AD? Can you imagine if SpaceX had been around 1000 AD, where we would be in 2024? It's crazy. We'd be living on the moon in a heartbeat. Steve Mullen, I left the cult Mormonism. Yeah, that's awesome, Stephen. Glad you got out. Pink Lotus, Greek mythology similarities and giving my child fear of God is what changed my mind about religion. Religion does more harm than good. I wish I had not been raised in Christianity. Yeah, agreed very much. And for anyone that doesn't know my story, and I'm going to get back to my notes here in a second, but for anyone that doesn't know my story, my kids really were the impetus for my escape from Christianity. I did not start studying all those things like you mentioned in Greek mythology until I realized I was teaching my kids bad things. We were sitting around singing Joshua Fought the Battle of Jericho. Just a fun song. It doesn't get into the horrific atrocities of the story, but I knew that eventually I'd have to explain to them the context of the other atrocities and say, we do serve a God who demanded genocide, and that's a good thing. He was right to slaughter innocent men and women and children and babies and animals, to burn everything down and take the young 12-year-old virgin girls for yourself. That's that was okay. We had to defend that. You have to defend that God in that context. You can't say God was wrong. And it wasn't saying, the Bible doesn't say God allowed people to do that stuff. It says he commanded them to. So my kids became my savior. Excuse me. I think going back again to some of my notes, we would have probably had more necessary conversations as the kids got older. For us, now as we think about our kids, but for us when we were kids, as we got old enough to really think about world history and where we sit in world history in terms of our culture and the time we are, I think we would have had more conversations about healing our culture from religious trauma and not perpetuating it. If your autonomy had been respected, you wouldn't have been subjected to a lot of psychological manipulation by Christians, to emotional abuse, spiritual trauma, at least not to the extreme degrees that many of us were. I imagine a life where spiritual leaders are not able to wield fear and guilt like weapons, but instead there's an expectation that they're going to guide us towards support and growth and healthiness and away from toxicity. And instead of hearing sermons about you deserve hellfire and beware of the danger of thinking for yourself, instead things like mental health and even therapy, they're not seen as enemies of the faith, but as allies in the quest for wholeness and healing on an individual and collective basis. We would have been so equipped, so much better equipped with healthy coping mechanisms and we would not have been left to just internalize this shame of you're a broken sinner. What a beautiful thing it could have been, both for us individually, for our societies, and for our families. On that note, I think we would have been taught to trust ourselves. You all know the verse we're thinking of. We're all thinking of the same one. Lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your paths. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Sorry, I forgot the first part. You would have been taught to trust yourself and to not defer to authority, especially not to ancient authorities. In this world I'm imagining, you would have been taught to trust yourself, to trust your instincts and your intuition. Imagine being told from a young age, who has the power over what you believe? You do. Who is the authority over your life? Ultimately. Like, yes, your parents are your custodians and they help you to grow up and, not run out into the street and put your hand on the stove. We're the custodians, but who is the final authority over your life and your mind? It's you. You have the power to determine your beliefs, to chart your own course in the long run, and to trust your inner sense of what you know. We would have been raised to understand that wisdom is not about old pages, dusty pages from ancient texts, from old ancient men long dead who claimed divine insight and divine revelation, but wisdom that you need is in your own heart and your own mind. It's right there. It's right inside of you. Imagine growing up with the confidence that you can think for yourself. You can make your own decisions. You can learn from your own experiences without being second guessed or overruled by some external authority or divine book or your pastor and preacher. Instead of our pastors and priests and parents saying this is what's right and there's you cannot question it. What if you had been encouraged to develop your own moral compass? Say, how do you know what's right and wrong? I think arguably our voices would be ultimately, as we grew and got to adulthood, we would be stronger. Our convictions would be our own, not someone else's, not inherited. And our paths would probably be unique to us, but they'd be more beautiful, and we'd appreciate what it took to get us there. Our worlds would be focused so much more on empowerment. It almost wouldn't be like a focus. It would just be an assumption. And instead of always deferring to others and other beliefs, we would say, what do I think about it? We would have grown up in a world where your inner voice, and your intuition, and your capacity for independent thought is a good thing. It's celebrated. I think about how when many of us deconverted, we found for the first time ever, perhaps, the freedom to start to say, you can truly trust yourself. And it was, for all of us, very weird. It was like a whole new kind of confidence, but it felt weird because we're just so not used to it. We're so used to saying, don't trust yourself. You're bad. You're going to mess this up. If you're trusting yourself and not God and his word, it's basically, you are letting demons influence you. But imagine growing up with the unshakable confidence that you can think for yourself. You can make your own decisions. You can learn from your experiences without constantly bowing your knees to someone else's judgment. And instead of being told that your thoughts are inferior or a sign of weakness, you can just be said, you can hear the words, your mind is capable of incredible things. Trust it, develop it, nurture it, love it, use it. It's beautiful. And again, I think this has strong parallels to our sexuality. We were taught for so long to distrust our bodies and their desires and to label it all as a worldly carnal lust. Oh, you want to look at that picture? Oh, you want to masturbate? What a bad thing. And we were tricking ourselves and collectively into thinking that we were delighting our God when we were ignoring our sexual urges. And in a similar way, with thought autonomy, imagine how life could have been so different if instead of proverbially being taught to bow your head and obey and just ignore it, we were taught to lift our heads high and question everything. You would have been given the tools to analyze, critique, and form your own conclusions. And you weren't going to be just spoon-fed a prescribed set of beliefs. And that heavy chain, I think a lot about it, like, because I said so, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. That was a jail and a prison for our minds. But imagine if instead your mind is free to soar, free to fly high and explore all kinds of ideas. And, life is like a landscape and you want to explore and go on adventures without fear. I think when we first learned as deconverted people to reject ancient authorities, we were even though that might have been our focus of like, okay, the Bible might not be inerrant. It might not have been written by who we thought it was. It might not have been preserved the way we thought it was. But you were in that act, even though it might have been purely felt academic, you were starting to reclaim your mind. You were removing that compulsion that had been built into you for so long to surrender your autonomy to men who died 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And your autonomy, was based on these texts from people who lived in such a different time, in a different world, a different place, a different culture, with horrific biases and limitations. We would have learned, I think, that wisdom is not this treasure buried in the past, but it's a force that lives in each generation and evolves. It gets better. We would have been taught that we have just as much right to question Moses or Paul or even Jesus, even Yahweh, as just the same way that we do question a politician or a teacher, and that no human, no matter how much we think of them or how much the culture thinks of them, nobody's beyond scrutiny. Nobody. Imagine if you've been told you don't have to accept any truth just because it was written 1,000 years ago. You don't. You just don't. You have the power to decide what resonates with you, to test ideas against your reason, your conscience, your experiences. Instead of being told blind faith is virtuous, we would have learned that, I think, courage is going to be prevalent when we're questioning things. Skepticism is a good thing, and integrity is going to lie in the best sense when we challenge dogmas that are long since held. And honestly, that obviously extends way beyond religion. That's including politics, including all kinds of other ideas. We don't have to just question the status, or we don't have to just accept the status quo. We can question it and challenge it and say, that doesn't sound right to me. It's a good thing. I think too, in that sense, about just the freedom to even mock ideas. Not to say that other people aren't free to believe what they want to believe, but to say, if you come up with a really crazy idea, like I need to cut off the end of my little boy's penis who just got born because the Bible says circumcision's a good thing, maybe, I'm allowed to challenge that. I'm allowed to mock it and say, you're crazy. You want to mutilate a child's genitals? You're crazy. I'm sorry. Or to go to different stories in the Bible and say, Abraham was praised because he was willing to sacrifice Isaac. He heard a voice saying, go kill your son, and he's a good guy. You're crazy. I will mock you. I will mock your ideas. That was obviously never allowed. Going on to another point, I think we would have really enjoyed community more. For us, a lot of it was sheltering. The community, the big broad community is the world system. It's part of the devil's world system. The idea of having space for different ideas and friends, close friends who diverge from us, it wasn't a big, widely accepted thing for so many of our Christian groups. What if diversity was not just tolerated, but was celebrated? Where there were different faiths and philosophies and worldviews that could come together, not necessarily in spite of their differences, but even because of them. And where you could say, I want to understand you. I want to connect with you. I want dialogue to be open. And, again, respectful, but with mockery when you're going to go off the deep end. If you're going to talk about, hurting people or hurting children, I'm sorry, but I'm going to mock you and say your worldview is hideous. But otherwise, where it's just like, I'm just thinking, I wonder if this book might have a divine source. I wonder if there's a cosmic force behind it all. I don't know. I'm just thinking through it. That's okay. We can come to different conclusions. But I think if we could have that, I think the community, the broader community in our schools and our friends that we grew up with, it would be about community and connection, not about converting everybody. In that sense, I think we would also have a real strong appreciation for our shared humanity. For so many of us, when you get told that the way to salvation is very narrow and very few people get there, the way to destruction and eternal damnation is very wide, and a lot of people get there. The vast majority of people will burn in hell someday, according to that worldview. It kind of takes away a bit of your humanity, because you have to sort of shudder that part of you that feels that empathy. Oh, I feel so bad for them that they're burning. Wow, eternal conscious torment for my neighbors, for that nice kid down the street who happens to be in a Hindu family. You have to kind of say, well, I kind of cringe at first glance, but again, theology and doctrine trumps all. Theology is the queen, and At that point, we have to say, if God says the best and most just outcome for those people is eternal conscious torment, is hell, so be it. Praise the Lord for being willing to put his holiness on display. His glory, it will shine even brighter by their punishment. But instead, when we escape that stuff, we realize that stuff messed with us. It let us imagine not necessarily the genocide of our neighbors like in our lifetime, but basically that we were okay with the genocide of our friends and family and communities and the world. We're okay with genocide in the afterlife. Like, yeah, I don't want it to happen anymore. I know what happened in Old Testament times in real life, in real time, if those stories had been true. And that would have been okay then. I would have fought for God, and I would have killed the Amalekites and hacked Agag to pieces. But I don't want that in my current life. I don't want to see that bloodshed. But mentally, I still want genocide in the afterlife. That's what it comes down to. If we had thought autonomy intact, we would have found meaning in our shared humanity. And we would have been okay with diversity. We would have found that different stories make our lives beautiful. And what if we were told from the earliest days, we're kind of all in this together. Our differences make us beautiful, but we're in this together. And I think in that world, things like empathy and kindness and even cooperation would not be secondary to our religious allegiances. I mean, do any of you remember pledging allegiance to the Christian flag? Where you'd literally pledge allegiance to the American flag and then you'd pledge the Christian flag? I remember that. Your pledge of allegiance to Jesus was very real. You were a soldier in the Lord's army. We would literally sing, "I'm in the Lord's army, yes, sir." That's what we were doing. And everyone else was sort of, in some ways, an enemy of God. We could, turn or burn is basically what it amounted to. What if instead we could see every human being with all of their diversity as being intrinsically valuable to us? Not because of a value from a God, but because we choose to give them value worthy of respect and compassion and understanding. And imagine if we had heard from a young age, you don't have to agree with everyone, but you do have to treat them right. You have to treat them with kindness. You don't have to believe what they believe, but you have to honor their right to see things differently. I think we would begin to see other people as, again, that tapestry idea that human experience is like a fabric with this rich beauty and all this color and texture from the different ways that people look at life in the different cultures. What a cool thing. I think we would have learned to approach other people with curiosity and respect, not with fear that they're, demonically motivated or disdain. We would have been taught that these differences that we saw were not a threat, but were a way to learn and maybe even to grow. I imagine if you could have been asked as a child, why do you see the world that way? What experiences have shaped your beliefs about this or that? And to say that to other people too, for parents to say that to their kids, but to teach them to say it to other people. Why do you, Muslim family or Hindu family, why do you believe that way? I know in saying that there are fundamentalist Muslims and fundamentalist Hindus who would probably, I don't know this for a fact, but some of them would probably say, you Christians are the ones that are on the way to hell. You're wrong, and you're going to pay for it. I understand that, but I still think that there is a sense in which we could have had a generic appreciation of other people's beliefs and say, okay, you think that there's a different God. You think that there's a different way of life. You think there may be many gods. You see gender differently. That group has female gods. Okay, my group only has male gods. Just there's different ways of seeing that stuff and saying I'm not necessarily going to believe in your stuff, because I think as you get more skeptical, your bullshit meter goes up. You're like, that sounds just as bullshitty as mine, the group I came from. But at the same time, you say, I'm not afraid to listen to you. I'm not afraid to listen to your journey. One of the things I love to do whenever I have to take an Uber is just ask people about their journeys. I'm sure some of you do that too. Or if you're an Uber driver, maybe you're asking your person you're picking up about their journey. But just to say, I'd love to hear your story. What a cool thing. Instead of building walls around our beliefs, we were taught to build bridges. and just to say, I'd love to hear your story. How's life been going for you? What do you think? I love the idea of being fellow travelers on the journey of life. And in many ways we are. I forget the exact quote. I'm sorry for forgetting here, but somebody said something like, we're all just friends escorting each other to our deaths. And as depressing as that thought is, in a sense, it's accurate. We're all escorting each other in the dark to the end of our time, and our time is short. So why spend that short time saying in the dark blindly, like, you're wrong, no, you're wrong, no, you're wrong? We're all blind. We're all in the dark. We all don't know where this universe came from. We all don't know, what's going to happen in world history. We don't know if we're going to, what's going to happen after us. And in some ways, it doesn't matter. It's for a different generation. Let them, and but when it's their time, they'll also have to deal with the existential crises of, wow, my time is finite. I'm going to have to die and pass it on to my kids too. Just your journey is your journey. Your time is your time. And we are surrounded by fellow travelers on this journey of life in our specific time frame. I love the idea of children learning to see beyond labels. Do you ever think about that? The labels that we picked up on, especially some of the worst ones, with against maybe groups like homosexuals and so forth, but just the labels of the unsaved, the lost, the depraved. What if a child grew up in a household where they valued empathy over judgment? Even something not spiritual, like what if you see a homeless person on the street, and instead of being afraid of them or having disdain for them, what if you're just filled with compassion? You're saying, what is this person's story? How can I help? What a difference that would make. That little shift in perspective in the lives of a child and the lives of those that they would touch. I know that for me, when I was growing up, a lot of my motivation, if I could put it this way, was I hope that so-and-so finds the right path before it's too late. Because time is short, and God has, said judgment is coming. It is for, man wants to die, and after that, the judgment. And then, bam, judgment seat of Christ. Books are opened. Did you believe or didn't you? And if you didn't, then you still stand in your sin, and your wickedness is going to be judged, because otherwise you're not covered by the blood. Instead of saying, I hope they find the right path before it's too late, what if you just said, I wonder what that person believes. I wonder what their journey's like. Imagine if adults could do that. Because that's what this is about, is, we're looking backwards in a sense for this brief conversation, but we're also saying, what can we do differently now? How can I look at the adults next to me in the store, in the Uber car, in whatever? How can we engage in meaningful conversations about the differences with those around us without the pressure to prove who's right and wrong, but to simply understand and grow together and appreciate your journey? And that fear of otherness that's so prevalent, what if we could have it fade and replace it with a genuine desire to connect and learn from each other? I think in that context, we would have absolutely learned to express ourselves without constant judging of other people. When you're a Christian, you're just inherently taught to judge other people. You're either in my group or you're not. And I think too, on the other side, a lot of us felt like we were being judged by whether we were both, yes, in the big picture in the group or not, but also, are you doing things that are according to our party line? Whether it's things like, are you watching the right movies, listening to the right music? But in terms of creativity, when you think about the creative freedom that we could have had, if your mind was not restricted by this doctrine, by this worldview, whether you were as a child wanting to create art or write something, you were musical, and eventually that could have evolved into something much bigger. What if instead of being told your work has to conform to a specific standard, you were just free? You were just free to express yourself. Imagine the books that we would have possibly written, the paintings we would have created, the music you might have composed, all of it free from the fear of divine disapproval. What if your mind was sort of untamed, unshackled? What if you were free to challenge the status quo? I mean, imagine writers. I mean, and we know there are writers, but imagine if those of us who grew up in Christianity could have been one of those writers who never felt the need to temper our words or to soften the way we're saying things because we're afraid that we're going to offend everybody's religious sensibilities around us. What if you could write an essay or some kind of article and it questioned the beliefs, the long-held beliefs of people around you? What if you could dig into the heart of debates and challenge norms and speak truth to power? What if you could do those things and say, I'm not afraid to do those. I'm not afraid God's going to get me for saying this. I think a lot of us, even just the words, like we were afraid of bad words. Like if you say, the F word, oh, that's bad. So make sure you can say fudge, but that's too close for comfort. Don't say that, shit, but you can say sugar. Even just words, we were afraid of using words. So much fear woven right into it all. And there were these invisible lines, these unwritten rules, some of them written, but some of them unwritten, but we had to follow it all. What if we were free to have revolutionary ideas without the taboo of you can't go there. You just can't. I love to think about children creating art where they're free to express their thoughts, even their fears, their dreams. No judgment, no censorship. Our art is like a playground for our minds. What if you could say to a child, there are endless possibilities, and draw what you feel, paint what you dream, create what makes you come alive. There's no fear, there's no judgment, there's no censure. There's no wrong or inappropriate because it doesn't conform to your religious beliefs. Imagine a child that could paint a picture of a family with two moms or two dads, and not being worried, oh, this depiction of a family and of love is going to be met with so much disapproval. Two moms or two dads? No. Oh, you can't watch that Disney movie. That Disney movie has, they talk about, homosexuality in a positive sense. Just all these things they were just drilled into us. Those were demonic messages. And we were never free. We're never free. Think about gender roles. Imagine a young girl writing a story about wanting to be an astronaut and specifically not wanting to be a homemaker. For many Christian groups, that itself was almost as bad as denying the cross of Christ. Like if you're saved, then clearly you must be a woman who wants to be a homemaker and have as many kids as God gives you. They go hand in hand. And I know for some of you where that's not what you grew up with, that's like that's a non sequitur. But for a lot of us, those were like completely, if you're saved and you're a woman, you want to be a homemaker and have a lot of kids. What if children's creativity was just truly a playground for their minds, where every thought, every emotion, every dream was valued and respected, and self-expression was okay? It was part of being a human. It was not something where the parents thought, I have to control this, I have to limit this, keep it within the boundaries. For a lot of us too, I think we're always thinking about the future. What do I do with my life and how am I going to be seen? What is my legacy going to be? The future was always a big deal for us. What's the ministry God has for me? What doors is God opening? What's his will? But imagine that in all those questions of what am I going to do with my life? Do I grow up to be a firefighter or a teacher? What am I going to do? What if in addition to those specific questions of your job and your career, there was just a general context of a future based on autonomy and respect? Thought autonomy and respect. Imagine that you were trying to create a family dynamic that would create eventually young adults and adults who would create their own family dynamics, where you would say, we want every person in this family and hopefully in the community and the whole world to think and believe and express yourself however you choose. And that's okay. Diversity is okay. Differences are okay. We'll find some common ground in our shared humanity. But if you could imagine that growth that could happen where thought autonomy is a fundamental right. It's not a privilege granted to only those who conform, but it's a fundamental right where all the voices are heard, all the questions are valued, and all the beliefs are respected. I just think it's such a beautiful thing, realizing that we're all in some ways on the same journey, regardless of our faith or lack thereof, or religion, different gods. We're all just trying to figure out how to do life right. I'm going to go to the comments in one section. I wanted to just end, though, with a couple quick thoughts about emotional health. And this is a big deal for me, just my current events with my family, as many of you have been following my situation. But I think for a lot of us, if our thought autonomy had been respected from the start, our emotional health would have looked so different. For many of us, our minds are used to being battlegrounds. We're torn between what we genuinely felt and thought versus what we're told we must believe and feel. And instead, what if our minds could have been sanctuaries, as it were, where all of our aspects of our humanity were embraced, and we could explore who we were without fear of judgment. Certainly, that freedom from guilt and shame, which has such a lifelong impact on us, that it just internalizes and goes so deep. When you tell kids you're internally sinful, your thoughts and desires are flawed, and you have this internal narrative that develops that tells you you are never enough to start with. You were born condemned, you're born in sin, and you are never enough. The only way you're acceptable is if God covers you. It's not even that you become enough, it's that God is enough and he covers you. You're guilty for doubting, questioning. You're guilty for feeling basic human emotions like anger and sadness and desire. What if you were taught that those feelings aren't wrong? And I think about a child. Again, this is very, very real to me in my life. But what if a child who has anger, and instead of just scolding them for expressing that anger, what if we're taught to understand it and to navigate it if we can? And just instead of saying, your anger is a sin that displeases God, you could essentially say to them, our anger is a signal that something's wrong. Let's talk about what's going on. And where emotions are seen, in a sense, as valuable feedback from our inner selves, and they're guiding us through what we need and want and through our fears and our hopes, they're not signs of moral failure. We would have so much weight released. So much weight. Instead of thinking to ourselves, that's a dangerous thought, or I can't stray from the narrow path, we're free to explore our doubts. We're free to embrace our humanity. In that context, your mental health, I think, would have such a greater chance of thriving. Imagine if you'd been told, it's okay to think for yourself. It's okay to have doubts. It's okay to be different. Your mental health gets rooted in self-acceptance and self-trust instead of this constant surveillance and, oh, I'm such a bad person. What if the thought crimes that we talk about so much and that Hitchens talked about, what if that intrusive God's looking at you and he's judging you and he knows what you're thinking, you dirty pervert, you bad person. Instead of that guilt that's so woven into us as Christians, what if the thought crimes were just gone? I would argue that our ability to have great mental health would just skyrocket. We were taught that even thinking about certain sinful acts were as bad as committing them. That's a big, that alone is mind job. We had so much guilt. You think about teenagers, especially where hormones start going. Normal sexual thoughts lead to cycles of shame and self-loathing. These natural thoughts, these natural urges and feelings would not have been met with condemnation, but with understanding. And what if a parent were to say to a child, it's normal to think about those things. It doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you human. You'd have such a healthier understanding as a child of sexuality, and you'd be able to regulate your mind and your thoughts and your emotions so much better. I have a lot more I want to say about this, but I'm at an hour, so I want to get back to the comments. But I just wanted to kind of say, I hope that those of you who are parents will encourage questions. Make your home a place where curiosity does thrive. Encourage your kids to ask questions about everything. I hope you'll consider providing them resources, different books from different religions, possibly, certainly different philosophies, different science books even, and stories that just encourage critical thinking and empathy and respect. I hope you'll model some critical thinking, show your kids, look, I used to think this and I thought about it differently. I changed wildly, almost in some ways. Let me tell you, kids, how I used to believe and why I believed it and why I changed. Critical thinking is so important for kids to see. Show them what it's like. Show them why you said I became more skeptical, and skepticism is a good thing. I hope you're going to be willing to validate their uncertainty and their doubts. It's okay to not have the answers. It's okay. It's okay to explore those without fear. If you believe differently than me, you're going to go to hell. I hope you'll consider encouraging your kids with just the emotional expressions that they have. It's okay to have fears and doubts and joys and even anger. Kids need to learn to articulate their emotions and their thoughts in a constructive way, or it will come back to bite them and hurt you later. I hope you'll consider encouraging your kids to celebrate their differences and others' differences. I hope you'll consider ways that you can create different safe places for exploration. Kids need to feel like it's safe to talk and explore and think through these things. I hope you will teach your kids about things like consent and boundaries. Imagine if consent and boundaries, we're talking about thought autonomy. So many of us grew up in a world where you don't have a choice. Do you consent to this belief system or not? It's just you will believe. You will believe, or else. And so many of us had it wrapped up in the issue of body autonomy was not there. I don't care if you don't consent to have your butt beaten hard till it's red. God tells me to beat you because if you don't, you're going to disobey, and you disobey me as a parent. So you need to learn to obey me. So I'm going to beat you till you're obedient. And that's in a sense, God using me to help you prepare to bow your knee to him. Bodily autonomy was decimated. Consent and boundaries and autonomy were decimated when we were kids. For so many of us, no one has the right to beat the hell out of your body, and no one has the right to control your mind. No one has the right to make you feel guilty for thinking differently. I hope you'll consider trying to promote some kind of open dialogue with your kids at certain ages. I hope you'll encourage them if you find them challenging dogma. If they are questioning rigid beliefs, that's a good thing. Help them to explore these ideas. I hope you will help your kids to be inclusive of diversity. I hope you'll encourage them to be affirming of people who are different than them. It's a beautiful thing. I hope you'll model the idea of autonomy in your marriages, in your homes. You have to model the respect for autonomy. If you demonstrate it to your kids, they will pick up on it. And I hope finally that you will simply be a strong advocate for the freedom to believe or not believe. It's okay to not think like me. I love to tell my kids, do you have to believe like me? Do you have to be like so-and-so, so-and-so? No, you don't have to believe like anybody. Do you have to be an atheist? No, you don't have to grow up and be an atheist. Atheism is not the goal. It's not. It's never been the goal. We're not trying to make, just like we shouldn't have been trying to make, little kids into Christian soldiers. We're not trying to make kids into atheist soldiers. That's not the goal. The goal is thought autonomy. You believe what's best for you. I started with saying, I hope that you won't see this as just a way of us beating up on the past generations and saying you all did a shitty job raising kids. Arguably a lot of them did the best that they could. But I hope you'll think of this more as in terms of a conclusion, and I'm going to get to the comments, as we're thinking through the power of what could have been and what still can be. Imagine this world. It's a world of freedom and empowerment. We can't change our past, obviously, but we can choose to try to create a different future. And as we respect our autonomy and grow in that and the autonomy of others, we're fostering environments where curiosity is cherished, questioning is encouraged, belief is a personal journey, and it's the power of what still can be. So I hope some of that resonates with you all. And I'm going to read through some comments here, and then we'll wrap up. But I appreciate your willingness to let me share from my heart on some of these topics. Some of these are so near and dear to me in terms of just my own kids. My heart aches for my kids. It really does. So getting back to some comments. Pink Lotus, just the Adam and Eve story is complete nonsense. If it were true, humans would have died out very early from the extreme birth defects. Yeah, agreed. The other side, like the stream, folks. Thank you so much. Appreciate your encouragement. Let's see here. Steven says, today is 180 from moral ethics and common sense. Yeah. Derek Cruz, everyone is born by natural evolution, not by a magic man. Yeah, exactly. And let's see here. Steve says, it led to psychiatrists and pills. Yeah, for a lot of people, the stress and the anxiety that we were given as Christians It does. It leads you certainly to some mental health issues if you're not careful. It's very sad. The Middle East would have peace without the dogma of religion. Yeah, that's a great point. Fire Unbeliever, I was in trouble a lot when I was a kid. My parents also removed my thought autonomy, often punishing me for questioning them or for a look on my face that they imagined was a bad attitude. Yeah, that is a great point. For a lot of us, it was not just you believe and you act in a certain way. It was the attitude was very much part and parcel of that. Very strong. I can relate to that so much. Apostate Ann, caring more about the soul of the person than the individual opens up your whole world. Yeah, well said. Very well said. Yeah, everyone was such a project when we were Christians. I recognize Christianity for what it is now, a fear-based blood magic cult. Yeah, absolutely. Eggshells and broken glass. Yeah, good analogy. Even saying, oh my God, was a bad word. Yeah, very much. Shut the front door. Yeah. So we found that any way we could to not say the bad words. I actually did get my mouth washed out with soap once. I don't remember what the word was that I said, if it was like a sexual word or a bad word, like a curse word, but I said something. I literally had to take a piece of like white soap and put it in my mouth and bubble, get lots of bubbles in there. Ugh, tasted that for the next 3 or 4 hours, I think. Billy Bob Wombat says, you're on a healthy path. I started my personal spiritual journey over 40 years ago. Good on you. That's awesome, Billy. Awesome. I love thinking about how my thoughts will evolve as I get further and further away from Christianity. I am almost at my 5-year anniversary. Another few weeks here. Stephen says, anger is a huge sign for kids. Something is seriously wrong. I tried to, but they put me on medication and I became a zombie kid. Yeah, that's very, very true. A lot of people do that. You hurt yourself if you don't listen to kids. Yeah, exactly. Well said. Pink Lotus, I used to see non-believers as small-minded. Now I realize I was the one being small-minded and not questioning the truth. Yeah, great point. Spare the rod and spoil the child. I hate that quote. Yeah. Craig, this topic really hit me today. Thanks, Tim. Keep up the good work. Your kids are lucky to have you for that. Thank you so much, Craig. Really appreciate your encouragement. Hello, too much to text. Hope to get on a live show sometime. Yeah, Greta, we for anyone that doesn't know, I'm going to have live streams every few Saturdays, and some of them even more than that. But for example, this Saturday the 7th at 7 p.m. Fingers crossed, nothing that I mentioned gets canceled because of a schedule change or technology issue. But this Saturday the 7th at 7 p.m. I will have already hopefully done 2 live streams throughout the day Saturday, but I'll have an open mic on Saturday night for you to just come on and talk about what you want. Same thing the following Saturday the 14th, 7 p.m. And then on Saturday, September 21st, 7 p.m., we're going to have a poetry slam again. I'm going to have a sign up, so hopefully we have a lot more than the people that came before. I would love to have like 10 or 15 people on that if possible or more. Let's, bring out, I know you all have great thoughts. Bring out your poetry, bring out your lyrics, sing it for us, say it for us, whisper it if you're into ASMR, whatever you got to do, but get on there, share your poetry, share your heart. We'd love to hear from you. I'll be advertising that, so you'll hear more about that soon. But yeah, we would love to have you come on, Greta, and share your stuff. Again, this Saturday is open mic night at 7 p.m., so feel free if it's a good time. And I'm going to wrap up with that. Greta, feel free to reach out to me privately if you want to keep talking about how to get on. We can also consider an interview if you're at that point where you're ready for that. I'm on Facebook again. The handle is @HarmonicTim. But thank you all so much. I really appreciate your encouragement, and I hope some of this really does resonate with you. We need to think about what we went through. We need to think about the psychology of what happened to us, and we really need to do a better job for our future generations, for our kids. They deserve better. And I think the more that we realize what happened, what could have been, that the what could have been in a looking back, but hopefully a positive sense, but also saying what can be from this point on, it matters to these kids. And we've got a great opportunity to heal ourselves, to increase our mental health, and to be able to do such a better job for our kids. And they need us. They need us to show up big and leave this planet, leave our families better than we found it. So I encourage you in that, and I challenge you to be the best you can be. If I can be of any help to any of you on that journey, please feel free to reach out. Love you all. Thank you so much again for your support. If anyone does feel like they can support my channel, all the ways are beneath this video. And yep, Greta, I will, if you just look me up on Facebook @HarmonicTim, that's how you can find me. So thank you all so much. Appreciate your support verbally. If anyone can support financially, appreciate that too. And please keep an eye on the channel. A lot more live streams coming. I did, YouTube told me, I didn't count this to confirm, but YouTube told me that I did like 60 some videos last month. A lot of them are live streams. So I'm going to try real hard to keep that going. So many good topics. Let's, and if you have topics on your mind, let me know. I'll try to think about it and come up with some good ideas. We can also do some, tag teams, things like that. I've brought people on before. I'd love to do it again. But let's find some way to keep this conversation going, and let's get down to the nitty gritty. Like, let's not keep things surfacely of, oh yeah, Yahweh's an idiot and it's mythology. Yeah, that's a great place to start. But getting to the psychology of what we went through and how to do better, that to me is my bread and butter in many ways. We don't want to just, look at where we came from. We want to look at where we're going. The future is going to be brighter, but we need to think deep thoughts. Just like we were encouraged to think deep thoughts and pray deep prayers as Christians, we need to do the same thing now as people who've deconverted, and we're capable of it. We just need to help each other out. So I appreciate the great thoughts you all have done me so proud with your thoughts in the live stream. By the way, I do go back after the live streams, and I keep the notes up after I end the stream, and I go back and I look through everything and I take a lot of notes. Often I'll come up with 4 or 5 ideas for the more live streams. So it's crazy. It just like spiderwebs out. Anyway, thank you all so much. I really appreciate your time and your encouragement, and I'll be in touch. See you hopefully even tomorrow night. Have a great day. Bye-bye.